Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're tackling something I think we've all dealt with at some point, figuring out how to stop a dog from barking. Luckily, we have some awesome articles and listener notes to help us deep dive into this. And this turns out there's a whole science behind why dogs bark. Who knew?
Right.
Unlocking that mystery is going to be our ticket to finally getting them to hush. Okay, let's unpack this.
You know, it's funny how we humans, we just jump straight to wanting the barking to stop without ever stopping to think, what are they even trying to say? Barking is a dog's main way of communicating.
Yeah.
So it's like trying to get someone to be quiet without figuring out why they were shouting in the first place.
You're so right. I hadn't even thought about it that way. So it's like we need to learn their language. I'm already intrigued. And speaking of language, your sources actually break down all the different types of barks. I had no idea it was that complex.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's way more nuanced than we realize. Your dog might be barking to alert you to something, or to be social and say hi to another dog. Sometimes it's pure excitement, like when you come home. Or could be they need something: food, water, a potty break. And then you have barks of distress or anxiety, guarding their territory, even just being startled.
Wow. Okay. That is a lot more than I was expecting. So if we can figure out which kind of bark it is, then we can figure out what to do about it, right?
Yeah.
But let's be real. I bet our listener is most eager to figure out how to stop the barking that's already driving them crazy.
Yeah, you're spot on. But here's the thing, the materials that you sent, they really emphasize preventing that excessive barking from happening in the first place. Meeting your dog's needs is absolutely crucial. It's like us as humans. If we're tired, hungry, or bored, we're way more likely to get cranky and lash out.
Makes total sense. So we're talking about exercise, mental stimulation, a consistent schedule, all that good stuff.
Exactly. A dog who gets enough exercise. And I'm not just talking about running around. Even a 20-minute sniff walk where they can just explore all the smells can be mentally tiring for them. A dog who's mentally stimulated with puzzle toys or training and who has a predictable routine, they're going to be much calmer, quieter dogs.
Okay, that tip about the sniff walk is brilliant. I'm totally stealing that one from my own dog. I am picturing a lot less barking in my future. But let's say we've ticked all those boxes and we're still dealing with problem barking. What then?
That's where we get into management and training techniques. And when we get to those cases, it's helpful to think about environmental management. Can you reduce the triggers that are setting your dog off in the first place?
Environmental management, what does that even look like?
Well, let's say your dog barks like crazy at every person who walks by the window. Something as simple as using privacy film to block their view can make a world of difference. If they're sensitive to outside noises, white noise or calming music can help. Sometimes even just making sure they have access to fresh water and a comfy place to rest can reduce attention-seeking barking.
It's all about taking away the reasons to bark.
Right.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together, but I have to ask, what about the techniques for actually training them to be quieter? I'm really drawn to the idea of positive reinforcement. It just feels so much kinder than the old school punishment methods.
Positive reinforcement is definitely the way to go. It's about teaching your dog what you want them to do, instead of just reacting to the things you don't want. And you know what's fascinating? You can actually teach a dog to bark a set number of times and then be quiet.
Wait, seriously, tell me more about that.
It's pretty cool. So you start by rewarding them with a treat whenever they naturally pause after a few barks. Then you gradually increase the number of barks before they get the reward. Eventually you introduce a cue word, like quiet, and they learn to hush on command. It's a great way to give them an outlet for that barking instinct, but also have a way to control it.
That's amazing. I love that we're giving them a way to communicate without it becoming overwhelming for us. It's so much more respectful than just yelling no at them, which, by the way, we all know is a terrible idea.
You're absolutely right. Yelling just adds more chaos to the situation. And it brings us to an important point. Punishment of any kind is never the answer when it comes to barking.
Okay, let's talk about that. What exactly is punishment and why is it so harmful?
Well, punishment can be anything from yelling or using any harsh corrections to things like shock collars. And yeah, these methods, they might seem like quick fixes, but they're really damaging. They don't address the underlying reason for the barking, and they can really erode your dog's trust in you.
Totally. It's like if we're trying to have a conversation, but someone keeps interrupting us or shouting us down, it's no wonder they get confused and anxious.
Exactly. It's like we're trying to solve a communication breakdown with more yelling. So instead of teaching them how to cope with their triggers or communicate in a more appropriate way, we're just creating more stress and fear.
Okay, I'm definitely convinced punishment is off the table. But before we move on, I'm actually curious about those anti-barking devices. You know, they're marketed as being humane, but something about them always seemed a little off to me. What's the deal with those?
Yeah, you're right to be wary. So devices like citronella collars or those ultrasonic emitters, they might stop the barking in the moment. But they're essentially just punishing the dog for trying to communicate. And remember, we talked about how important it is to understand the why behind the barking?
Yeah.
And these devices totally ignore that.
So even though they're quiet, they're not actually happy or learning anything.
Right.
It's like if someone put tape over our mouths every time we tried to speak. Like, we might be silent, but we'd be pretty miserable.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. So these devices don't teach dogs how to cope with their triggers or communicate in a healthier way. They just suppress the symptom without really addressing the cause.
Okay, I am officially adding anti-barking devices to the no-no list. So we've talked a lot about what not to do. But let's get back to the positive side of things. You mentioned meeting their needs. Can we dive back into that a bit?
Absolutely. The sources you shared are totally spot on about prevention being key. It's about creating an environment and a lifestyle for your dog that minimizes those reasons for barking in the first place.
You know, it's funny. I think a lot of us dog owners, we assume we're already doing enough. But maybe we all need a little reminder. So what are some of the key things that we should be focusing on?
Well, exercise is a big one, obviously. A tired dog is a much less barky dog. But it's important to remember that not all exercise is created equal.
Okay, spill the tea. What's the best kind of exercise for a barky dog?
Well, one of the most effective ways to really tire a dog out, both physically and mentally, is through what's called a sniff walk.
A sniff walk? I've never even heard of that.
It's exactly what it sounds like. So instead of just marching your dog around the block on a leash, let them sniff to their heart's content. Allow them to explore and investigate all those interesting smells in the environment. You'd be amazed at how mentally tiring a good sniff walk can be. Even 20 minutes can be more effective than an hour of running around.
That is so interesting. I am definitely trying that. I have a feeling my dog's nose is going to get a workout.
Oh, and don't forget about mental stimulation. Puzzle toys are fantastic. You can even make your own by hiding treats in cardboard boxes or muffin tins. Training sessions are another great way to engage their minds. Even just 10 minutes a day can make a difference.
I love that. It's like brain games for dogs. I'm realizing I need to step up my mental enrichment game.
And speaking of games, don't underestimate the power of play. Interactive games like fetch or tug of war. Not only fun for them, but they provide both physical and mental stimulation.
Okay, so we've got exercise, mental enrichment, and play. Anything else?
Consistency is key. Dogs thrive on routine. Having a predictable schedule for things like feeding, walks, playtime, and even downtime can do wonders for reducing anxiety and preventing that excessive barking.
So it's not just about what we do, but when we do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine how stressful it would be if you never knew when you were going to eat or sleep. That consistency helps dogs feel safe and secure. And that, in turn, can lead to calmer behavior.
That makes a lot of sense. We've got this whole toolkit for prevention building up now, but let's say we're still facing some barking challenges. What other techniques are out there?
We touched on the quiet cue earlier. Teaching your dog to be quiet on command can be really helpful.
Right, so if the doorbell rings and they go ballistic, you can just say quiet and hopefully they'll chill out.
Exactly, but it's important to remember that this takes time and patience to train effectively. We don't want to just start shouting quiet at our dogs and expect them to understand.
Right, of course. So how do we actually teach them this magical quiet cue?
One technique is to use a process called shaping. So you basically start by rewarding any little bit of quiet behavior. Maybe they just pause for a second after barking. That's your chance to mark that behavior with a yes or a clicker. And then you give them a treat. Gradually, you can increase the length of quiet that they need to offer before getting the reward.
So we're slowly shaping their behavior by rewarding those little moments of quiet.
Exactly. So you're basically teaching them that quiet behavior gets them good things.
I love that. It's so much more empowering for them than just being told to stop. But what about situations where it seems like the barking is totally random? Is there anything we can do about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes what seems like random barking is actually triggered by something in the environment that we might not even notice.
Like what?
It could be a sound that's too high-pitched for us to hear, or a subtle vibration, or even a change in the barometric pressure.
Wow, I would have never thought of that. So how do we even figure out what's setting them off if we can't even perceive it ourselves?
Yeah, well, it's a bit like detective work. You really have to become a keen observer of your dog's behavior. Start paying close attention to the context in which that barking occurs. Where are they? What are they looking at? Are there any specific sounds or events that seem to precede the barking? And once you start noticing those patterns, you can start to identify those potential triggers. And then you can come up with some management strategies.
So it's all about becoming a dog behavior detective. I like that.
And remember, we always want to rule out any medical causes for really sudden changes in behavior.
Right, so if they suddenly start barking more than usual, it could be a sign that something's wrong.
Exactly. Things like pain or hearing loss or even cognitive decline can all manifest as changes in behavior, including increased barking. So if you notice any sudden or dramatic shifts in your dog's barking habits, it's always best to just check in with your vet, just to rule out any medical issues.
Yeah, that's a really important reminder. I think we often forget that our dogs can't just tell us when they're not feeling well, so we have to be extra attuned to those subtle cues.
Absolutely. And speaking of those subtle cues, there's another factor that we haven't talked about yet that can play a significant role in barking: separation anxiety.
Okay, I've heard of separation anxiety, but I'm not sure I fully understand what it is or how to deal with it. Can we unpack that a little?
Of course. Separation anxiety is essentially a fear of being alone. So dogs who experience this become incredibly distressed when their beloved humans leave. And this distress can manifest in a variety of ways, including excessive barking.
So it's not just like they're a little sad that their person's gone. It's like a genuine fear response.
Exactly. It's a panic response.
Yeah.
And it can be really tough on both the dog and the owner. Dogs with separation anxiety might bark, howl, pace, destroy things, or even try to escape in a desperate attempt to reunite with their humans.
That sounds incredibly stressful for everybody involved. So if you think your dog might have separation anxiety, what can you do?
The best approach is to consult with a veterinarian or a certified dog behaviorist. They can help you assess the severity of the anxiety and develop a treatment plan that's tailored to your dog's specific needs.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all solution.
Definitely not. Treatment plans often involve a combination of approaches, including behavior modification techniques like desensitization and counter-conditioning.
Can you explain those?
Sure. Desensitization involves gradually exposing your dog to the trigger, which in this case is being alone, but in very small, controlled doses, while keeping their stress levels below threshold. Counter-conditioning involves changing their emotional response to the trigger. So instead of feeling fear or anxiety when you leave, they learn to associate your departure with something positive, like maybe a special treat or a fun puzzle toy.
So we're like rewiring their brains to associate being alone with good things.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that this is a process. It takes time, patience, and consistency. It's not a quick fix, but it can be incredibly effective in helping dogs overcome their separation anxiety.
Wow, this has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've covered so much, from understanding those different types of barks to all the complexities of separation anxiety.
It's been a deep dive for sure. And I think we've successfully challenged that idea that barking is just a nuisance to be silenced. It's about seeing it as a window into their world and using that understanding to help them live happier and calmer lives.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect place to pause for now. We'll wrap up this deep dive in part 3 with some final thoughts and takeaways for our listener. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive all about dog barking. And we've learned a lot. We've gone from deciphering those different types of barks to understanding how powerful positive reinforcement can be. We even got into those more complex situations like separation anxiety.
Yeah, it really is amazing how much there is to learn about something that we so often just label as noise.
So true. I feel like I've gotten a whole new perspective on barking, and honestly on dog communication as a whole. But as we wrap up here, what are some of the key takeaways that our listeners should really remember when they're trying to create a quieter and happier home for everyone?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to remember that barking is a natural behavior for dogs. It's how they communicate. So our goal shouldn't be to eliminate barking completely, but to understand what our dogs are trying to tell us and address those needs.
Right, it's all about having a conversation with them instead of just shutting it down.
Exactly. And once we understand that why behind the barking, we can start to put those prevention strategies into action. We talked about meeting your dog's needs, things like physical exercise, those sniff walks we were talking about, mental enrichment with puzzles and training, and of course having that consistent daily routine to really help them feel safe and secure.
Yeah, it's all about setting them up for success, giving them those tools they need to thrive without having to resort to all that barking.
Exactly. And you remember, positive reinforcement is key here. Instead of punishing that barking, we teach them what we want them to do, whether that's being quiet on cue or even just simply rewarding them for that calm behavior.
And even in those trickier cases where maybe there's an underlying medical condition or, like we were talking about before, separation anxiety, getting help from a professional can really make all the difference.
Absolutely. Vets and certified behaviorists are like such incredible resources when it comes to tackling those more complex situations.
This has been such an amazing journey. I feel like we've really lived up to the name Deep Dive. But before we go, is there one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think it really all comes back to this. Now that you know more about why dogs bark, try to really pay attention to what your dog might be trying to communicate to you. Listen not just with your ears, but also with your heart and mind. And you might be surprised at what you discover about your furry friend.
I love that. It's like we've learned this secret code, a new way to really connect with them and understand them on a deeper level.
Exactly. It's about building that relationship based on mutual respect and communication, not just silencing the sounds.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of dog barking. We really hope you've enjoyed it and learned some valuable tips along the way. And hey, if you've had any of those aha moments or maybe some barking breakthroughs of your own, we'd love to hear about them. So until next time, happy listening, everyone.
Thank you for your watching. If you find this video is helpful to you, please share it with your family and friends. Leave us a like and subscribe to our channel. And turn on the bell, that way you don't miss every single one of our videos. So that's for today's video. See you next time.